Hello and welcome to another My NTND marriage video. The dark side of autism. I'm going to share a few stories of people and then sort of talk about perhaps things we could implement within society to help and make things better. So it's not to have an attack at autistic people. It's not to say that they're all this way and that they're terrible and anything like that, but these are just some unfortunate stories that I'll share. So to start with, Lacey Fletcher. I'm not sure how many of you would be familiar with this story, but Lacey Fletcher was a young woman who was left to rot on her couch. And she'd gone through high school seemingly doing okay. And then it seems like once high school had finished, she had some sort of massive burnout because all of a sudden she wasn't functioning very well. She kind of ended up sitting on a couch and not moving. And they say 10 years, but I'm not sure of how much of those 10 years she was actually just sitting on that couch. I feel like Lacey might have been maybe moving to start with, like getting up and going to the toilet, getting up and getting food. But over time, things just got worse and worse until eventually she was no longer even bothering to get off the couch. At a certain point in time, she became so starved and malnutritioned that she probably couldn't get up off the couch. And she started doing her business and everything where she was, and her parents were bringing her food. And again, I don't know her difficulties around food, if she had been a difficult eater and maybe only liked certain foods that perhaps contributed to her malnutrition. But either way, she did pass away, and obviously there was an uproar because what were the parents doing, you know? All that time they didn't give her medical assistance, they didn't call an ambulance, they didn't call a doctor to come and visit, they didn't pick her up and drag her off the couch, take her to a medical facility. They just kind of accepted that this was who she was going to be. And again, we don't know the why fors because this case is still in court. There's not a lot of details coming out as yet. But we don't know what type of perhaps meltdowns Lacey was having that made her parents not want to intervene. Like she could have been screaming at them and they were like, whoa, okay, you do you. But here's something that people aren't factoring in that I've seen in reports, and that is it is so likely that both her parents were on the spectrum. And I say this because it's definite that one of them would have been because it's genetic. But the fact that two parents can leave a girl in such a situation like that, that suggests to me that they're both on the spectrum. Now, okay, if you're autistic, you might be thinking, hey, what the hell? What are you suggesting? Not like all autistic parents are terrible and neglectful and etc., etc. And yes, you're right. They wouldn't all be this way. However, the point of this video is to talk about the fact that there are parents out there who are on the spectrum who are so incredibly neglectful of their children. And in Lacey's case, this seems to be what happened. It was like her parents were like, we're just going to put you in the too hard basket and push and leave you there. And we're not going to try and do anything extra because perhaps we can't think outside of the box. We don't know what to do. We're not even thinking of you because autism is about self and maybe we just think about ourselves. We don't really know exactly what was going through their heads. Again, not discussed in the media, but this is my interpretation, is that I think that it's very likely both parents are on the spectrum and they just didn't participate in her life or know what to do. And when Lacey passed away, they gave her a bag of sweets and went away for a weekend. Now, wow. I'm not laughing because it's funny, I'm laughing because it's incredulous. Just the thinking behind that. Like, here's our daughter dying on a couch, we'll give her some sweets, a bag of sweets, and leave. And they came back and she was deceased. So all up, it's a really awful story. The parents have been charged, but again, we don't know the full story. They're saying that her autism got worse. Autism doesn't really get worse per se, but you can have burnouts and things like that that make you unable to function after a while. So that's one story of the dark side of autism. The next story I want to talk about is Samuel Woodward. Samuel was a young man who was obviously autistic, bullied at school relentlessly to the point where he learned to probably loathe people, definitely fear them. They weren't nice to him. And this went through primary school and high school. He was having a miserable time. Those who knew him in his later years described him as dark, and I'm kind of thinking, well, yeah, if you're all going to bully him, how did you expect he was going to turn out? Happy? Like, it's just silly, you know? But those meeting him later probably weren't the ones who bullied him and didn't really understand any of that. But anyway, Samuel's life takes a drastic turn for the worst because he's not making any friends, because he's autistic and awkward and people don't really understand him. They're not taking to him, they just find him odd. He starts making friends online. And the friends he makes online, well, yeah, they weren't good people. He befriended neo-Nazis and those types of people and started having negative conversations around that. And that leads to him sort of, I don't know, just becoming even more hateful towards people. And they had very specific views, obviously, neo-Nazis. They don't like gay people, they don't like Jewish people, they probably don't like females, they don't like people of colour. They've got all sorts of things they don't like. And they're influencing this young autistic man. And chances are this guy was gay himself, but I don't think he's admitting to that. But he grew up in this highly Christian family where being gay was all sorts of wrong and bad, and he had a dad who was really enforcing this gays are bad sort of rhetoric. And so now this man's confused, right? Well, gays are bad and I'm gay and what's going on? And so he's not coping really well with anything that's going on with him. Anyway, he ends up encountering a gay man. They sort of set up some sort of date and things go awry. And in saying that, I'm not sure if it was premeditated, if he planned to go there and harm this person or whatevs, but he does, and he's put in jail, and now he's in jail. It's all struggle central because this guy's on the spectrum, and now he's in prison, and his hair's all matted, he's not brushing his hair, he's not looking after himself, he's just deteriorating because mentally he was never fully able to begin with. But again, you take it back to the parents. Now, in this case, I believe, and again, speculation because nobody talks about it. They only talk about the traits in the parents, which lead me to make these speculations. But it seems like perhaps his mum was neurotypical and he had a neurotypical sibling, or at least a sibling who was less autistic, and the dad was autistic, and black and white thinking with the dad. It was just this way and that's it, and don't argue and do as you're told. So his parents don't help him with the bullying. They don't intervene. They don't get him help. They don't get him to see specialists. They don't put him in a more understanding school or a better situation. And they don't check on him. Nobody's going into his room and going, hey, what are you doing? What are you up to? Who are you talking to? What the hell? Neo-Nazis? No, nobody's doing any of that. He's just completely left to his own devices. And autistic people can be really impressionable, especially if they don't have really good guidance. They can fall down any kind of dark rabbit hole and end up on the wrong side of everything. And that's what happened in his case. Now, I'm not saying he shouldn't be in jail because he hurt somebody. He killed somebody, as a matter of fact. So obviously he needs to be imprisoned in some form. Although I think maybe a mental institution might be better, because I think that he's just kind of damaged and mentally incompetent. And here's an interesting thing. A lot of people don't treat autistic people as mentally incompetent. They look so normal. They appear so normal. They just look like functioning regular people, and then you stick them in this kind of situation where they've committed a crime, they've had no help, no guidance, no nothing, and then they're in jail and they're still having no help and no guidance. Now, granted, a lot of people in jail have those upbringings, terrible upbringings that lead them to do their crimes in the first place. I guess this guy being on the spectrum, he's not a great deal different to them. But I still debate whether putting a mentally disabled person in prison is ethical, and people don't realise how mentally incapable they are. So anyway, next story. So there was a young man, Roy Curtis. He changed his name to, and let me try to get this right, sorry, he changed his name from Ayman, let me just get my specs, Habayeb. Anyway, this young man committed suicide. Probably blurb that out because YouTube penalises and such, but hey, I'm just going to tell it like it is. Because he was seeking benefits to help him live. So in Australia, I don't know if it's the same in America or other places, but in Australia we have here what we call Social Security, and that's where the government pays people who cannot work a income, and income, it's usually really small, like you can practically barely live off it, you know, but it's something. And so people who cannot work get this particular income, and the Social Security team, they are an absolute nightmare to deal with. They want you to jump through hoops to prove that you need their help and that you need their services. And so here's this young man, he's applying for these benefits and they're making his life difficult. They're wanting him to do something like job search, which here that means that you have to apply for so many jobs per week or per month and report it to the place, which is called Centrelink, who do the Social Security. And then they say, yes, you've applied for enough, and no, you haven't applied, or whatever, you know, they just make your life difficult. And so they're making this guy's life really difficult. And he's trying to explain to them, I'm not mentally able to work, I cannot do it. And they're looking at him again, he looks like an able-bodied person. He's on the spectrum, but they don't get that, they don't understand that, they don't know what it means to be on the spectrum, they don't understand the disability behind it, and so they are trying to force him to find work, and he's not coping well with that. Now, unfortunately in this young man's case, he cut his family off. I don't know for what reasons. It could be that because autistic people tend to not keep in contact with people the way that, say, a neurotypical person might. It could be that he felt pressured by his family. I mean, we don't know. His family, from what I've read in the media, seemed to be caring, and they were trying to find him. So that suggests a level of care there. You wouldn't try to find somebody to care about. Anyway, so they couldn't find him. Perhaps his name change inhibited them finding him. Anyway, so his family can't find him. He's got no help, no support. He's all alone. He's living in an apartment by himself, and he takes his own life because Centrelink are giving him help. And the really, really sad thing about this story is that it took months for anybody to find him because he had no people in his life. In the end, what made them go and look for him was because he wasn't answering Centrelink's letters, and so somebody goes and finds him. And so they're in, another tragedy for this young man who was, they just didn't get it, Centrelink. They just didn't understand, And it is sad that his family wasn't there and such. And he obviously didn't have aid. And this is another thing that concerns me about people on the spectrum, the lack of aid they receive. He should have had a care worker, somebody going around and checking on him, helping him out, seeing if he needed anything. Somebody that this man can have in his life periodically for short periods of time so it's not overwhelming, because it might have been like that with his family. Maybe being around his family was overwhelming, because family is overwhelming the best of times, let alone when you're on the spectrum. Anyway, so that's another tragic story. You might be familiar with the next story, Stephen Crowder. His wife released a video of him verbally abusing her while she's pregnant. And a lot of people are sort of having, interesting discussions around this. Some see that what he's doing is not verbally abusive, all different kind of debates. I look at it and I hear the illogic in what he's saying, and I think to myself, I would hazard a guess that this man is on the spectrum. He seems to not understand what it is that is going on and what it's taking place, or that he's even being unfair, being unrealistic. I don't know. I just looked at that video and thought it wouldn't surprise me if he was. So I just wanted to put this in here and make a mention of it, because if you're familiar with the video, you might sort of be able to relate to what I'm saying. It certainly reminds me of the type of conversations, debates, type things that I've had with my husband that do this weird sort of circular argumenty thing where they're never resolved. What he's upset about is really unusual, strange, odd, petty, maybe. I don't know, you kind of never get to the end of it, or the crux of it, what's actually on their mind. Anyway, that's just an aside story. Which leads me to the next story I want to talk about. Now, I don't know the names of the people in this story, and I will have a link below of the clip that I'm about to discuss so that you can watch it yourself and see what I'm talking about. So, the clip in question, there's a wife who makes a sandwich for her husband, who is sitting on a couch, coffee table in front of him, TV up on the wall, laptop in front of him, so he seems to be doing some sort of computer work whilst the telly is on. The kitchen is behind them with some sort of bench, and she's making that sandwich, and she brings it over and she puts it on the table. And here's where it gets strange. We're not really sure why, because he doesn't really explain it well, but her putting that plate on the table sets this guy off. He just starts chucking a 3-year-old tantrum. Really bizarre behaviour. And he doesn't articulate at all what has bothered him so much. And this would, lead back to alexithymia. He can't seem to verbalise why her putting the plate on the table made him irate. But he just goes berserk. And he's kind of doing this high-pitched screamy thing and moving and mocking and saying something to her about, you always do this, you always do this, but we don't know what the this is. You always put the plate on the coffee table when I don't want it there. You always put the plate down on the coffee table loudly. We don't know. it's really hard to make out what it is exactly that this man is upset about. And a lot of people watching the video going, whoa, you need to run. And apparently they're not together anymore. And people are saying this man just can't relationship. And I watched the video, of course, and can tell this man is so on the spectrum it isn't funny. And definitely when they say he's not able to relationship well, correct. And this is the point that I'm getting at. This is the thing that people just don't understand. People who are out there, not in it, don't have these lived experiences and don't get it. And even people who are on the spectrum who would watch this video and go, hey, what the hell? We are not like that. You're full of beep. And we're not all bad and yada yada. Even people on the spectrum don't know that they can't relationship well. And I'm not saying that they all can't relationship well, but there really are a fair whack of them out there that can't relationship well. And I watched that video and I've been there. Not quite the 3-year-old tantrum. My husband is far more aggro-rageful, and he does articulate what has bothered him, but not the why behind it, because he doesn't know the why behind it. But he's far more likely to get up in my face, yell at me, doing the pointing of the finger and kind of stuff, right? So I watched this video and it was just so relatable to me, this whole getting upset over something trivial, petty, doesn't actually really matter in the scheme of things, but nobody knows what actually upset you. You're just upset. And the neurotypical person's kind of sitting there going, what the hell? What's going on? And now they've got to deal with it. And then he will calm down, walk away, and this woman is just left to deal with the aftermath of how that made her feel. The anxiety, the stress, the trauma, the drama, you know. I mean, you watch the video and you can feel it, you know, the angst. But this guy will just move on, come back later and be, oh yeah, what's for dinner? Been there, done that, I know that too. And that's the thing, is that they get over these arguments really quickly. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the neurotypical stress for days, weeks, worried about the next time they make a sandwich, you know, you can imagine it. And so you're watching the video and you can see that there's an abusive element to it. But those who have never dealt with somebody who is on the spectrum wouldn't relate to living with somebody on the spectrum and that video. And that's what I sort of wanted to get at here, is that there's a real dark side in many cases to living with people on the spectrum. And again, I'm not saying you people on the spectrum suck. Obviously I'm married to one, I've got a son who's on the spectrum, and I love them. They're, you know, my family, I care for them and such. But there still is that dark side to living with them. And it's a reality that a lot of people on the spectrum don't really want to acknowledge, don't really want to talk about. If I do talk about it like I'm talking about it now, they can get defensive and say, well, we're not all like that. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. But there are a fair whack out there that are. And that's the reality of it. There are a lot of people living with people on the spectrum, a lot of neurotypicals living with neurodiverse, having these really harrowing times because the person can't relationship well. And it's not necessarily their fault, they have a disability, but they're so unlikely to acknowledge that they can't relationship well. Like my husband, he never thought his rages were his problem. He thought that I was just irritating and setting him off, and not really understanding that if you can't get in a relationship, a normal everyday relationship, without somebody triggering you over something trivial, I question whether you should be in a relationship, you know. And we have gone through this, my husband and I, hence why he's going through counselling, because if you're going to be in a relationship, you need to learn how to be in a relationship. You can't just wing it and chuck tantrums and expect everybody to deal with it because you're on the spectrum. Not really. Anyway, moving along. This next story is really intriguing. It's about a lady named Erica Ruff. And she died. And after she died, they realised that this person was an enigma, a mystery. Who was she? It wasn't her real name. And so, obviously, police and such did a deep dive into the who-fors and what about this person. Where had she come from? Where and when was she born? Did she have family? It turns out that she had a previous life that she had just got up and walked away from. And I was listening to the story unfold, and straight away I knew this lady was on the spectrum. Even her partner, who she was with at the time that she passed away, was talking about what she was like to live with, how she barely spoke, she had a special interest, she didn't talk about her past, she was so able to just get up and walk away from whatever, move to here and deal with that okay. And here's an interesting curiosity about this. People on the spectrum have a really uncanny ability to just get up and walk away and not look back. It's something, I don't know, something in their nature that they just seem to be able to move on really quickly and not care, not wonder, not worry, is anybody looking for me, is anybody worried about me? In fact, there's this kind of joke amongst the neurotypical partners that whenever you hear those stories about how somebody went up the street to get a pack of cigarettes and never came back, we all kind of joke and go, yeah, autistic, you know, because they can and they do. And that's where I'm leading with this story, is that that's another character trait of them, is that they can just walk away so quickly. You'll often find, if you're the neurotypical partner and your neurodiverse partner ends the relationship, or you get a divorce, or you end the relationship, doesn't matter who did it, that they just move on like that, real quick. Who? What? What ex? I don't remember any ex, I'm over that already, I'm moving on. And they just have this real ability to just be able to move on so quickly. Got themselves another partner, all sorts of stuff like that. That being said, the whole getting a new partner real quick thing usually relates to the fact that, sadly, many of them struggle to look after themselves. And that's another trait that a lot of people just don't talk about. They don't talk about the fact that majority of hoarders are autistic. You know, Hoarders Are Us, those shows where they go into their house and the person's living in this, what do you call, like little dungeons and piles of stuff, and, you know, anyway, you know what hoarders look like. A lot of them are on the spectrum. Hoarding is an autistic trait. My husband does hoard to a degree. He's kind of like a little bowerbird. He just kind of collects stuff. But he's an organised hoarder. He's got places for everything, so you don't know about it. You just kind of open a drawer one day and it's full of stuff that you didn't know was there. And a fair whack of it's useful. Some of it's like, we're never going to use this, but okay. Anyway, so going back to my previous statement about how quickly they move on, they're not very good at looking after themselves. They really struggle with doing life by themselves. And this is another dark side of it that people don't talk about. They don't want to talk about. Perhaps people on the spectrum don't even know this about themselves. But they almost get into relationships so that they can be looked after. Because without the partner, they just don't fare well. And again, it's not all of them, obviously. There are plenty of autistic people who are single and doing well in life in that singledom. In fact, it probably suits them to a T, because having others around is quite problematic for them. Makes sense. But the ones that do get in relationships who don't know this about themselves, they tend to get into the relationship and Next thing, their partner is doing all of the work for them. All of the cooking and the cleaning and the raising the children and the medical appointments and the books, you know, the bills and such. And numerous amounts of autistic people get in relationships and don't work, and that's generally because they can't. And then it's left to their neurotypical partner to carry that megally intense load. I mean, can you imagine? If you're on the spectrum, you probably can't imagine. It's very hard for autistic people to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. So quite often the autistic person won't be working, the partner's carrying the load, that partner will then go, I'm done with this, I don't want to do this anymore, and that autistic person will, you know, have various reactions from, what, I thought things were fine, to, I'm going to kill you for leaving me. Does happen. Not all autistic people are murderers, it's not what I'm saying. You obviously get neurotypicals to murder people for leaving them as well, but it's just one of those things where it hits them, sort of blindsides them, you know. They just kind of don't see it coming. Or in some cases they're like, yay, please leave so I can go back to playing my computer games in peace. Thank you very much. Anyway, just another side, another dark side to being on the spectrum. So those are the stories. But now I just want to talk about the things that just relate to autistic people in general, with the traits and how they go about life, that people don't talk about very much. They're not really sort of open and honest about it. So firstly, as you've seen with these stories that I've spoken about, parental neglect is quite likely for people on the spectrum. They just don't handle themselves well, let alone their partners or their children. I mean, children, wow, how needy are children, you know? They want to talk to you about stuff and they need stuff and you've got to do stuff, and people on the spectrum are like, you know, this is overwhelming and I don't really want to do this. So even if you take somebody who's sort of decent at parenting, like my husband, he will do things like buy school uniforms, buy their books, food, take them for outings, pay for their outings with friends. Something he doesn't do is go up to them and ask them how they're doing. How's life? How's your friends? What are you watching online? You're not joining neo-Nazi gangs online, are you? You know, that kind of thing. He's not really doing that kind of thing. So he's a fairly decent parent, but still neglectful. And he doesn't really know he's neglectful. This is a curious thing. There's something about, I guess, being on the spectrum and your inability to look outside yourself. He has no idea that I do these things. Even if he sees me go into their room and talk to them, he still isn't really aware that I'm doing something he doesn't do. So I think that it helps in this case with my children. They've got one parent who's neurotypical, who is doing these things with them, because I take care of their mental well-being where he takes care of their physical well-being. So yeah, that's one thing that they quite often do, parental neglect. And obviously in Lacey's case, extreme parental neglect. They neglected her mental and physical well-being, and it killed her. So they killed her anyway. And with regards to also that parental neglect, they don't tend to check on their children's well-being at school. Like, are you being bullied, and do you want to do something about that? I'm the kind of parent where I have had, obviously, my children bullied on occasion, and I will go to the school and report it. I will phone them, I will email, because then it's in writing, and if it still continues, which it has on a couple of occasions, I will go straight up to the bullies and threaten them. You keep harassing my child and I will end you. You're dead. Don't mess with my children. And usually that will scare the bejesus out of them and they stop. Now, my husband did that in the last situation with my boy. He had these two children that were pestering him. And my husband went up and did that to them. The old "don't mess with my child or else." And they left him alone. And so I think that I sort of influenced him to be that way. Otherwise, I don't know if he would have done anything about it. But I'm the kind of person where if you're bullying my children, I will absolutely intervene, and I won't stop until it stops, because I have, really strong thoughts against bullying. But a lot of people on the spectrum don't do that. I have a friend who was bullied at school. It's very likely they were on the spectrum but never diagnosed. It was not a thing when I grew up that people got diagnosed for it. And her parents did squat about her bullying. Nothing. They never went to the school, just nothing, absolutely nothing. The old, just stay away from them. Yeah, that's helpful. Not. So yeah, they tend not to sort of really get involved in their children's lives. And on that note, they tend not to teach them about scams or don't join neo-Nazi groups online, or, the Elliot Rodgers of the world. Don't join MRA groups. They're not healthy. They're not good for you. They're not factual. Obviously there are battles between the sexes. Men thinking they're hard done by, women thinking they're hard done by, neither of them agreeing and such. But the idea that we need to take people out because of it, I don't really think that's a good message, and it's especially not a good message for a person who's on the spectrum, because they're open and vulnerable to these particular scams and such. Now, I don't know how much of Elliot's parents realised what he was into, but in most cases, when your parent is on the spectrum, they're not focusing on you and seeing that you're okay. In fact, I believe Elliot's parents knew that he was having issues, mental health issues, and they just didn't do much about it. So that's unfortunate. Then when the children are older, the autistic parents tend to make very little effort to keep in contact with their children. It's kind of like, now that you're out the door, I forgot about you. Children? Who? What? What children? And again, I am generalising. I'll have to say here, disclaimer, I'm sure they're not all like that. But I think that their idea of effort and involvement in their children's lives is very different to a neurotypical parent's involvement in their children's lives. And so yeah, they tend to not do well in that regard. If the children visit, there are certain situations where the parents and the children would just sit there, because the children on the spectrum, parents on the spectrum, they're all just sitting there quietly talking about nothing, or making the odd verbal sort of statement here and there. And I don't know if the autistic people sit around in that scenario and feel awkward, but if you're a neurotypical watching this fold out, you're like, that's unusual. And quite often it then falls to the neurotypical person to feel like they have to regulate that, get people talking. And again, I don't know, if you're on the spectrum, does that seem enjoyable to you to sit in a room and not talk to your family? Do you want somebody getting conversations flowing, or are you quite happy with that silence? I'd love to know. Comment below. From a sibling point of view, they tend to be distant with their siblings, sort of colder towards their siblings. There might be some violence involved because they've got alexithymia and they just use their body instead of their words. And then when the siblings grow up, this tends to alienate them. And the autistic siblings don't necessarily then reach out to their siblings once they've left home and initiate those kinds of contacts. They'll just sort of leave it to others to contact them. And it's interesting too, because say if I use my son as an example, he has friends he doesn't really talk to very much. He barely reaches out to them. He doesn't interact with them much online or text or ask them how they're going or anything like this. They will come to him now and again and go, hey, we've got this event, this party, there's something happening, and he'll go. We talk maybe once, twice a year, a couple of times. And he still considers them friends. He doesn't see it as, oh, I've hardly spoken to this person and I'm just going to wipe them off and, you know, they're not my friend anymore. He considers them friends, even though he doesn't ask about them and keep in touch with them and things like that. It's just a really curious thing. But on the other hand, autistic people will often say that they feel lonely. And it's a curious sort of conundrum, isn't it? Because how do you not feel lonely, but at the same time company overwhelms you? Where's that fine meshing of the two? How could that be done? Would it be a situation where they're saying to their friends, look, I can only do social interactions, you know, very sporadically, but I still consider you a friend and, you know, don't disregard me. I don't know how we would manage that kind of thing, but I know that a lot of autistic people say they feel lonely, they have a very small friend group. Sometimes the friend group is only online and they have no actual physical friends, which can still lead to a loneliness because you have nobody to sort of go up the street with, go to a cafe, go and see an air show, something, whatever it is that tickles your fancy. So I don't know how, as a society, we would help with that, how we could help with that. How do you help somebody not feel lonely when human contact and conversation overwhelm them? Food for thought. And so all up, I'm sort of thinking as I hear these stories and learning about these situations and the traits and such, that as a society we have a really long way to go with regards to understanding autism. And I'll just put a little interjection here, another story. There was another young man, what was his name? Isaiah Trammell. He was an autistic man that was put in prison or jail, because prison's the big ones and jail's the little one. Anyway, and he didn't cope with that situation well because it was obviously overwhelming, triggering, anxiety-inducing. I mean, you can just imagine. And unfortunately, that did lead to his death because he kept stimming by banging his head, and the people taking care of him, the people in charge of taking care of him did not take care of him at all. They just did not understand his condition. They didn't understand that he was stimming. They didn't understand his anxiety. They didn't understand that he has a mental deficiency. He's not mentally able. And this is the tricky thing. They look able-bodied. They are able-bodied. Okay, there's probably some autistic people who aren't able-bodied, but for the most part, I'm talking about autistic people who are able-bodied. They look like normal people who react to situations the same as everybody else, but they don't. They are mentally disabled. They have a mental retardation of sorts where their brains just haven't developed the way that they were supposed to. And from the outside looking in, people just don't get this. And they're treated poorly because of it. And I just think as a society, we've got a long way to go. We've got a lot of research we need to do. We've got a lot of more understanding that we need to learn. We've got a lot more help we need to offer these people that we're just not giving them yet. They need aids. They need people probably walking around with them 24/7 kind of thing, making sure they're okay, but obviously giving them space because they need their space. Like this Isaiah, somebody had gone up to him for a mental wellness check. That didn't come out well. For some reason they sent the police. I don't know why. It would have been much better to send an NDIS worker or something. I don't know if you have that in America. But somebody who knew about autism and all of its intricacies and such, who could actually go around and check on this young man and see that he was okay, not the police, because then he was put in jail, and don't really understand the why-fors about that part. But yeah, there's just not enough support, there's not enough knowledge. I mean, most people outside of this, so in my case I'm living this experience directly, most people around me have no idea what's going on and the struggles and all of that sort of thing, let alone everybody else in this situation right now. They're not understanding the struggles of the autistic person, they're not understanding the help that that person needs, they're not understanding the struggles of the neurotypicals and the help that they need. It's really just a very largely neglected part of society. Like, we know they're there, we know autistics exist, we talk about it more, definitely. It was definitely not a thing anybody talked about or understood or knew much about when I was younger. So it's certainly, more awareness is growing now, but we still have a long ways to go, and that's what these stories outline, I think. Anyway, longer video from me, I do apologise. I will break it up into segments so that, you can come back and watch bits later and, watch it on your time. And yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. I hope it was helpful in some way, shape or form. And if you can relate to any of these stories or have any input, please drop a comment below. Love to hear from you. And thank you for taking the time to watch this video.